The fact is, 80% of the Dalits in this country are landless laborers.
Sir, recently we've seen a lot of cases where there had been misuse of OBC creamy layer. IS Pooja Khedkar, despite her having assets worth 40 crores,
That in some places it's pretty easy to procure the non-creamy layer certificate. So trying to balance out between an equal outcome and equal opportunity approach at some level. The second was the assassination of Gandhi in 1948. These two events put to rest all discourses, all serious discussions on proportional representation in Constitutional Assembly forever.
Hello, welcome to this interview conducted by the Magazine Committee, Department of Political Science, Shahid Bhagat Singh College, Delhi University. I am Azhar Ahmed Dar, Editor-in-Chief of Check Review, which is the annual magazine of our department with democracy and elections as a theme for this year. Today in this interview, we have with us Professor Ashok Acharya sir, who will be talking about the future of social justice and affirmative action in India. Sir is currently Professor of Political Science at the Department of Political Science, University of Delhi, and a Global Justice Fellow at Yale University, USA. Sir has also held the Henry Hart Rice Visiting Professorship at Yale and is also Director of the Delhi School of Transnational Affairs. Sir, welcome to this interview.
Thank you.
Sir, my first question to you is, how would you evaluate the impact of affirmative action policies in India?
Well, it's been quite some time. The affirmative action policies are constitutionally mandated, as you may all know. And given this, the mandate that the Constitution gives, it has been fairly successful, albeit in a manner that the scope of such reservations have expanded over a period of time. And so the initial beneficiaries were seen to be SCs and STs, and now we have a whole lot of OBCs coming in within the purview of reservations. But if you look at the whether or not the policies have been successful, then my own opinion is that they have been. It's a mixed record, in many ways. I think it has been successful in many ways, and more so because affirmative action has provided a platform on which many of the beneficiaries have found some ground for politically mobilizing themselves. And so on the basis of political mobilization, I think that is the biggest strength that affirmative action has brought. So in terms of how much of justice has been done to these communities, that's a separate thing on which I would say there is a mixed record.
Yes.
But in terms of helping them mobilize politically, I think the policies have been a huge success.
Yes, thank you, sir. Sir, how do such policies balance group and individual rights?
Well, our Constitution has always believed in a simultaneous commitment to both individual and group rights.
Yes.
And whether we speak about the minorities or we speak about the other backward classes or we speak about the Dalits and all that, so there is a kind of a two type of justification for group rights in the Indian case. One is what we call a respect for difference, and on the basis of which we can, the Constitution mandates some cultural rights. And the second one is on the basis of group disadvantage, on the basis of which we proffer, the Constitution mandates affirmative action policies. And although, even if we take seriously the whole question of group disadvantage, on the basis of which we then decide which groups ought to benefit from the affirmative action policies, but the entitlement is usually to individuals. So individuals belonging to certain groups have, individually certain rights of claims. So in that sense, I think it's it's a good balance between both the rights of the individuals and the groups. The groups are decided on the basis of disadvantage, and individuals by merit of who belongs to which group.
Yes, sir. Sir, recently we've seen a lot of cases where there had been misuse of OBC creamy layer. IS Pooja Khedkar, despite her having assets worth 40 crores, had obtained admission in civil services and MBBS on a non-creamy layer OBC certificate. In this light, what do you think are various loopholes with the OBC reservations, and what should India learn from other countries in this regard?
Well, on the one hand, I don't want to go into the particular case of Pooja Khedkar and all, but I think, this non-creamy layer thing is a status that many who belong to OBCs might actually want to get. And I'm told, I do not have much very certain idea about this, but I'm told that in some places it's pretty easy to procure the non-creamy layer certificate. So Pooja Khedkar unfortunately got caught. There are many who haven't been caught, and so there are many people, even for that matter, even on the EWS, the economically weaker section. We also have many other doubtful cases. So whether it is the non-creamy layer or whether it is the economically weaker sections, you have many of those suspect cases cornering the benefits of reservations. So, depending on what the next round of questions are, probably I would like to also look a little more closely about not just the distinction between the creamy and the non-creamy, but on the whole question of the justifiability of expanding the scope of reservations itself.
Yes, sir. Sir, how do you view the recent Supreme Court's verdict on the subcategorization of reservation for SCs and STs? Do you think it will give way to political opportunism? And what are your views on extending this section of creamy layer to these sections also?
There is a good deal that the Supreme Court is pursuing with, in the sense of, they are probably pushing the entire scope of what justice implies for many who belong, let us say, to the Dalit community. And on the other hand, the unfortunate aspect of social justice in our country is to convert it into a sort of a discourse where no compromises are ever entertained, no negotiations are ever entertained. That is the unfortunate part. I think what the Supreme Court is, by speaking about subcategorization, it's actually taking a very strong stand. And there are views that many people have, and I think, that, for instance, those who have benefited from reservations for 2 generations or 3 generations, why should their wards or children get the benefit of reservations the 4th time, the 4th generation or the 3rd generation, or even the 2nd generation, depends where you are. Of course, if you have been in an elite position, then this in the 2nd generation, maybe, one should take a very closer look as to what can be done or undone to the system. The fact is, 80% of the Dalits in this country are landless laborers, right? Social justice to many of these Dalits means having access to some of the means of livelihood. And also, it's only once you ensure some of that means of livelihood, can they really take advantage of, what you call education and all that, and then qualify for the jobs and all that. That is not happening. In my own research, I tend to see that that even within a particular block, let us say a particular group, there are many what you might call intra-block inequalities. And so the subcategorization at a certain level is somewhere going to remedy this intra-block inequalities that exist. Because otherwise those who are excluded, or rather permanently excluded, let us say for the last 30-40 years, if some groups have been excluded from this entire system of reservations, then even while we try to impose social justice through reservations, but within the block itself, we create more and sinister and insidious forms of injustices within the block itself. So the intra-group or intra-block inequality is something I would worry about. So I would say, yes, so I think if the Supreme Court has said something about subcategorization, we should be taking it a little more seriously and come up with all kinds of, and that we should be responding to this and beyond the pale of politics, and to look at the ways in which we could actually do justice within that block to people who have been, sort of excluded from reservation benefits for a long, long time.
Sir, do you think that this subcategorization is the only way to ensure substantive justice? Also, do you think that this logic of, subcategorization should also be applied to the Women Reservation Bill?
That's a good question, but these are two separate questions. I think it's a good question to begin with. I'm not looking at the whole question of subcategorization. I'm trying to say that a good deal of what is called social justice doesn't go, squarely, or cannot be squared up with the idea of reservations all the time. After Mandal Commission report, which actually makes a kind of a clear preference for an equality of outcomes approach over an equal opportunity approach, I would say that unfortunately since then we have never been able to go back on the drawing table, so to say, on the table, to reconsider what kind of balance we wish to bring about in a country of such size and diversity, and see in what ways we balance an equal opportunity approach with an equal outcome approach. Unfortunately, in our country, the political discourse is so is so skewed that we don't consider, that there can be, we don't consider pretty easily that there can be very radical equal opportunities approach that are very much in tune with a social justice approach. So, of course, it depends, what do we understand by an equal opportunity approach? And, many people or many groups actually may or may not deserve reservations, but they do certainly deserve an equal opportunity, and, whereby whereby they have access to all facilities leading to education, short of giving them quotas and all that. And then, so I would say, well, most of the creamy layer, maybe, and probably I will make a provocative statement if I say this, need to be completely debarred from reservations. And, we give them equal opportunities, but not exactly reservations. We say that, yeah, you have benefited. You belong to the elite class amongst that particular group, and you have access to so many things. You may need a little bit more access or resources, let us say some scholarship or some free SIP, to have a free education and all that. No, that's something we can understand. But, a healthy dose of equal opportunity approach needs to somewhere counterbalance equal outcomes approach. Even if you look at Ambedkar, for instance, he was a votary of this balance. But unfortunately, nobody listens to him, even while he's made an icon of a certain kind of a discourse. But his iconic presence straddles not just the equal outcome approach, but also reaches out to the equal opportunity approach, which we, so this is a kind of we have missed out on that historic opportunity of trying to bring about a suitable balance between these two approaches. So I would say, yes. Coming to the second question, where you talk about women and all that, well, it's, again, I would say the same thing. A certain kind of a balance needs to come. Should we speak about a subcategorization within the for women, with regard to representation, I would say, well, let's not worry so much about it, because what has happened in our country is that, many political parties, and we know who they are, use this as a ruse to deny women the opportunity to represent themselves, and saying that, oh, are we talking about quotas within, so by insisting on this, so there was a kind of an unholy alliance between many political parties who, for various reasons, completely, jeopardized the bill from being passed. So the passing of the bill. It's only recently that it has come up, and so that's all in good thing. So I don't think at this point of time we need to go to the subcategorization way. And indeed, even with regard to subcategorization, even if I welcome it as a better step, a better first step, but eventually it must lead, any talk of subcategorization must lead us towards trying to balance out between an equal outcome and equal opportunity approach at this, at some level. So I'm not for the subcategorization of the women. I would say, let's first have the women representatives in the legislatures. Their presence as in a critical mass is going to be decisive, to shape many of the policies that need to have a gendered bias, or that corrects the gender bias, that exists otherwise. So I think, but after an assessment of, let us say, 2 or 3 elections, maybe we could, if you think that it doesn't deliver, then we could think about a subcategorization, but not exactly now.
Yes, very true. So, despite, reservation and other constitutional guarantees that have been given to various communities such as Muslims have been facing a representation deficit in politics, education, etc. Do you think the time has come for India to switch over to proportional representation, or what do you think is the solution to this problem at large?
Well, there was a time when we did consider proportional representation as an active option, when the Constitution was being written. And, so between 1946 to 1949, we were almost given, during 1946, when the serious discussions began in the Constitutional Assembly, we were almost given into the fact that this is something that's going to come in the Indian system of representation, proportional representation. And, but what happened is that 2 events actually changed the destiny of the country. One was, of course, the creation of Pakistan in 1947, right? The second was the assassination of Gandhi in 1948. These 2 events put to rest all discourses, all serious discussions on proportional representation in Constitutional Assembly forever. And after that, nobody brought it up, right? So these were 2 huge political events. So after the creation of Pakistan, after the partition, actually, people would say no. So there was a kind of a telltale, opposition to the idea of proportional representation. Oh yeah, meaning, oh, they had their Pakistan. Why do they want proportional representation now? Right, so all those who have stayed back, might as well integrate into the country, and rather than ask for separate electorates, which was seen in divisive terms, especially after the creation of Pakistan. The second one was, of course, after Gandhi's assassination, there was a bolder attempt to try have a very stronger India, and one that rose above, communal passions, tensions, and all that. So because of these 2 reasons. However, the fact of the matter is that in most liberal democracies around the world, and in the last 60, 70 years, or whatever we can see, we can glean our analysis from, we find that in the first past the post system that exists in most liberal democracies, gender representation is always below 10%. Representation of minorities is always way, way below their proportion of their population and all that. So you have hardly 2 to 3% of Muslim, representation, or less than 10%. Save in 1984 when Rajiv Gandhi came to power, and the Congress came to power under the leadership of Rajiv Gandhi, then the women's representation had shot up. But before that and after that, the representation was always below 10%. And the same is the case with minorities. So there has been a kind of a permanent, a permanent underrepresentation of minorities, for which we might be tempted to think that probably a proportional representation system is a suitable policy for us. I somewhere don't think that PR might deliver. There is, of course, there's not going to be the weight of political rhetoric, and especially after 9/11 and all that, is not so much geared towards underscoring the strength of multicultural arguments, especially those that intertwine with institutional arrangements of proportional representation anywhere in the world, leave alone India. But I think somewhere that a party list system of PR is something that we might wish to go for in order to strengthen the representation of all sections of the population, something that the Nordic countries are actually engaged in. So the Nordic countries are, but their PR system is more geared towards giving more representation to women. And so they have, because of the PR system, they have a very high system of representation. But at this point of time, even if normatively and on principle you might agree with the attractions of the PR system, I don't think politically it may be a very viable option at this point of time for its own, for its own reasons, that the political rhetoric, right now I think we live in a state of the world where there are other challenges of integration at the global scale that have become far more significant than how countries organize their internal affairs with regard to their diversity.
Interesting. So, a case recently came from Jammu and Kashmir in which the results of the civil services examination released by the Jammu and Kashmir Public Service Commission revealed that only 40% of people selected were from the open category. So, do you think this reservation has been detrimental to merit, as many have been saying?
That only 40% of who?
Of the people selected in the final list were from the open category.
From the unreserved category.
Yes,
from the unreserved category.
Yes.
So, but it all depends on what is the quantum of reservations there.
Yes.
If the quantum of reservations is well below 60%, which I suspect it would be, then of course it calls for some introspection on why the skewed results showed up and in what ways can we revisit this. Yeah, well, I do not know the details of this particular case, so I will not make any comments on it as of now. But I think that anytime a system fails or our recruitment process, shows skewed results, then we should be able to re-examine it and to see how we might, try salvage the situation in the direction of justice for all.
Yes, sir. Sir, do you think, there's end to reservations in the sense that will it end sometime?
Well, there are two parts to my response. Everybody wishes that we reach that stage where we may not need reservations at all, knowing fully well that it's supposed to be a short-term, fast-track justice system, which would give the maximum of benefits and reservations, especially, which is the strongest form of affirmative action, be given to the most disadvantaged groups, and to the other lesser disadvantaged groups, I would speak for equal opportunity. That's what I was trying to argue. So I would say that if we fast track that system, faster, there should be an end to this whole problem. But I think, my own response is that because of the fact, there is a scholar who has written on preferential policies around the world, Thomas Sowell. And he argues that wherever affirmative action policies have been introduced, they are bound to stay. They stay for political reasons for a long, long time. It's very difficult to, get a country out of that mode. So they are stuck in there. And what's worse is that the number of beneficiaries keep expanding. They don't get lesser and lesser as time progresses. More and more people are added to this. So there is a natural tendency for a system like a reservation to stay for a long time and for more beneficiaries to join this. And so there is a kind of a natural, a natural progression for not allowing this system to end and in the direction of expanding further. However, I think that an equal opportunity approach is the only solution, because let's say in 10 years or 20 years, or we give ourselves a limit and say, okay, we have reservations for another 20 years, and then we trickle it down to those, and trying to, cater to intra-block inequalities, and then have a complete equal opportunity approach for the rest. Why? Because we are a country where, almost or very soon, 1/3 of our population is youth. And if you go around, and I've gone around to many colleges, and I've spoken to students, and most of them actually, somewhere want that, or are believers in equal opportunity rather than reservations. Many, including the beneficiaries. And so the youth and the young people are actually opening up to, to a fresh dose of opportunities, given that the opportunity structure that is offered by the job market is getting significantly lesser. So our jobs are not expanding, and yet our youth needs opportunities. And we can only enhance that by devising a system where we think beyond these job reservations and think about, if you're talking about Viksit Bharat and all that, I think that idea of Viksit Bharat can only be tenable if you are talking about expanding the entire scope of opportunities, especially for the youth, who constitute roughly 1/3 of the population. So while the global population is aging, India's population is becoming youthful, and they need more opportunities. So I think in the long term, or maybe in the next 2-3 decades, I think that there would be a very strong call for more opportunities and less equalization of job prospects, as I see it.
True. So with regard to this question, I recently came across an argument made by Michael Sandel, who says that for reservation to end, two things must change, which is, first is economic inequality, that must change, that will change in the short run. But for social backwardness to change, it will take time. So reservation is going to be there in the long time. Yes, sir.
Michael Sandel is historically known for having taken a very strong anti-reservation view, as far as I know. But, for economic inequality to end any sooner, that's going to be a pipe dream. Because, both nationally and across the world, global inequality is at such a stage where roughly 10% of the top population, 10% of the population at the top have access to 76% of the global wealth. And the bottom 50% have less than 10% of their share of the total global wealth. So, and this is actually, increased, during the pandemic. And so during the pandemic, you had more millionaires coming up, more billionaires coming up, not just in India, but also in the US and in many other countries. So economic inequality is here to stay. And so we have to think about this aspect, not just nationally, but also globally. I don't know whether Sandel's system allows us to think more expansively about global systems, because he's a communitarian and he would be thinking only about, whatever it means, So we have another communitarian who has come to power now, who would talk about America first. But I think, if you're talking about economic inequality, you cannot isolate particular countries and talk about economic inequality that obtains in this or that country. It has a global presence. And that, and it's a huge global problem that can only be fought globally.
Yes.
And with regard to the second one, or the social backwardness, I I do not know how Sandel might talk about what needs to happen in America, for instance. America has abandoned all affirmative action policies. So I would love to see him give a very strong views about racial equality in the United States. So social backwardness, it's very easy to say social backwardness, but again, it's of different kind. If you look at the Mandel Commission report, they have actually skewed the entire understanding of social backwardness in such a manner that the more emphasis has been on social and educational backwardness.
Yes.
But whereas in the case of Dalits, you will see that the backwardness is of different kinds and pretty concentrated across both past and present. So it is the cumulative, concentrated form of inequalities that you see visiting some groups, by virtue of which we call them severely disadvantaged, that you can still merit or justify affirmative action for a certain period of time. But beyond that, I think it is just anyone's guess as to what we mean by social backwardness, because in terms of what I propose with regard to an equal opportunity approach, we need to reconfigure what social backwardness is, and we need to measure that, with an open mind as to what does social backwardness mean in 21st century vis-a-vis what it meant in 20th century. So these are things about which I think we need to have a very open deliberation, a very open and reasoned deliberation in today's time.
Yes. Sir, how is the concept of caste-based affirmative action different from that of a race-based one?
Now, they are both the same. They are both the same. If you are applying the group disadvantage principle,
yes,
which in the American case is applied by a black scholar called Owen M. Fiss, F-I-S-S, back in the 70s. So when he applied this group disadvantage principle, that also had, is a certain kind of an echo beyond the American soil. And basically, when we talk about race and caste and the similarities between them, I think we are somewhere trying to, customize justice approaches to a sociological understanding of societies. So if the sociology of United States says that roughly 20% of the population have been permanently disadvantaged for a long, long time, on account of discrimination and other forms of very insidious forms of inequalities. A similar such comparison could be made with caste groups of a certain kind, who also historically have also been marginalized for a long, long time. But I would say, but the Americans have never given up on pursuing equal opportunities, in a very, I think, at times, in a very ingenious manners. But we have somewhere fallen prey to a group-based job prospect approach or an equal outcome approach for a long, long time. And I think a healthy mix of both might be good for both the societies. But in effect, I would say, if there is a caste is, especially the situation of the Dalits, if it is ever compared to any other group, the strongest analogous group that you can ever think of is the blacks in America.
Yes. Sir, the last question of this interview is, what would you say about the future of India's affirmative action?
Well, I hope that affirmative action policies trigger some serious, prudent, rational deliberations and discussions on where we think we are going. We can't always be looking backwards because we have to move forward as well. If our eyes are always fixated backwards, we can't be moving forward. So we need some hindsight, and yet at the same time we need to move forward. And the way to move forward is to have a more open assessment and an honest, open assessment of where do we fix our goals are in future. I do not know what that means, but I think when we are having a deliberation on these open, honest goals, we can't be thinking about who gets what. But I think we have to first set the goals and the objectives of the country, which we are at this point of time actually doing, and then see how this or that policy fits in with the larger goals that we set for ourselves.
Yes. Well, thank you so much, sir, for giving us your precious time. It was an amazing and interesting session for all of us. I guess students will gain insightful. I mean, students will gain meaningful insights from this interview. It was an honor for me to interview such a great scholar whose books we read in our course, that's political theory. So thank you so much again.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for this opportunity and this, to reach out to all your students through this platform. Thank you.
Thank you so much.